The morning light filtered through the gauze curtains of our Philadelphia brownstone, casting everything in that golden hue that made our life look like a magazine spread. I stood at the kitchen island, reviewing the quarterly reports from my marine biology research lab, savoring the quiet before Derek woke up. These early morning hours had become sacred to me, the only time I could think clearly without his constant commentary about efficiency and optimization. Coffee smells incredible. Derek's voice interrupted my thoughts as he padded into the kitchen, his hair perfectly tousled in that way that had once made my heart skip. Even first thing in the morning, he looked like he'd stepped out of a Brooks Brothers catalog. "What's got you up so early, beautiful?" Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I glanced up from my laptop, just reviewing the summer research schedule. The jellyfish migration patterns we've been tracking are showing some fascinating anomalies. I'm thinking of extending the project through August. Derek poured himself coffee from the French press. His movements, precise and deliberate. Everything about my husband was precise and deliberate. After 3 years of marriage, I'd learned to read the subtle signs, the way he held his shoulders when he was calculating something, the slight pause before he spoke when he was about to suggest something he knew I wouldn't immediately agree with. "Actually, that's perfect timing," he said, settling onto the stool across from me. "I've been thinking about the Cape May house." My fingers stilled on the keyboard. The Cape May house. The Victorian cottage that had been in my family for generations, left to me by my beloved Aunt Maisie 5 years ago. The place where I'd spent every summer of my childhood, where I'd learned to identify shells and see glass, where I'd first fallen in love with the ocean that became my life's work. "What about it?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "Well, we hardly use it anymore. You're always buried in research, and I've got the Singapore deal eating up my weekends." Derek's smile was warm, concerned. "I was thinking we could rent it out for the summer, maybe through one of those luxury rental companies. The income could be substantial, probably enough to cover the renovation costs for the master bathroom here." I studied his face, looking for something I couldn't name. "We talked about this last year. I like having it available when we want it. And you know how I feel about strangers in Aunt Maisie's house. Of course. But think about it. Practically, Cora. When was the last time we spent more than a weekend there? And Maisie would want the house to be useful, not just sitting empty collecting dust." The way he said my aunt's name, casual, familiar, made something twist in my stomach. Derek had met Maisie exactly twice before she died. He'd been charming, of course, but I'd noticed how his eyes had wandered around her cottage, cataloging details the way he did when he was evaluating an investment property. "I'll think about it," I said, closing my laptop. "But I'm not making any decisions right now. The summer research project is my priority." Derek reached across the counter and squeezed my hand. "That's all I'm asking. Just think about it. We're a team, remember? We should be maximizing our assets. The house wasn't ours, it was mine, inherited and maintained with my own money." But Derek had a way of making everything sound like a joint venture, even when it wasn't. After he left for his morning run, I sat in the kitchen with my second cup of coffee, staring at the stack of mail I'd been ignoring. Bills mostly, and a few pieces addressed to Derek's consulting firm. I flipped through them absently until I found an envelope that made me pause. It was from Cape May County, addressed to me, but the return address was the tax assessor's office. Inside was a notice about a property reassessment for the cottage. Nothing unusual about that except for the note at the bottom indicating that recent improvement applications had triggered the review. Improvement applications? I hadn't filed any improvement applications. The cottage was perfect as it was, a pristine example of Victorian coastal architecture that Aunt Maisie had maintained with obsessive care. I'd changed nothing except to upgrade the electrical system. For safety, I pulled out my phone and called the tax assessor's office. After being transferred twice, I reached someone who could access the file. "Yes, Mrs. Linwood, we have applications for deck expansion and structural modifications filed 6 weeks ago. The permits are still under review, but they did trigger the reassessment." My blood chilled. "Can you tell me who filed these applications?" "Let me see. Derek Linwood, listed as co-owner and authorized to make improvements." I thanked her and hung up, my hands trembling slightly. Derek wasn't listed as co-owner of anything. The cottage was in my name alone, had been since Aunt Maisie died. I'd been very careful about that, even during our marriage, because I'd wanted to honor her specific wishes that the house remain in the family. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of normal activities, responding to emails, reviewing lab reports, confirming meetings. But underneath the routine, a cold certainty was growing. Derek had filed permit applications for a house he didn't own, which meant he was planning something he hadn't told me about. When he returned from his run, sweaty and energized, I was waiting in the living room with my laptop open. "How was your run?" I asked, keeping my voice light. "Great." Cleared my head. "Actually, I've been thinking more about the Cape May situation." He grabbed a towel from the hall closet and wiped his face. "What if we started with just July? Test the waters. See how it goes." "That's interesting timing," I said carefully. "I just got a call from the tax assessor's office. Apparently there are some improvement applications filed for the cottage." Derek's face didn't change, but I caught the split-second pause, the almost imperceptible tightening around his eyes. "Improvement applications? For deck expansion and structural modifications, filed 6 weeks ago." I watched him carefully. "Any idea who would have done that?" Derek tossed the towel over his shoulder and shrugged. "Probably some clerical error. You know how these small-town offices are, they're always mixing up files." They said Derek Linwood filed them, listed as co-owner. "Well, that's clearly a mistake." His laugh was just a beat too loud. "I'll call them tomorrow and get it straightened out. Probably some other Derek Linwood in the system." But we both knew there wasn't another Derek Linwood in Cape May County. And we both knew that Derek never let clerical errors slide. He was the man who called customer service if his credit card statement was off by 50 cents. That evening, Derek cooked dinner, his signature seafood risotto that had impressed me when we were dating. He was attentive, asking about my research, sharing gossip from his office. Everything was normal, perfect, even. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was watching a performance. After dinner, I excused myself to take a bath, but instead I went to my home office and pulled up the Cape May County property records online. The cottage was listed correctly in my name, but when I dug deeper into the permit applications, I found something that made my stomach drop. The applications weren't just for improvements. They were for modifications that would make the cottage suitable for commercial rental, widening doorways, adding bathrooms, installing commercial-grade appliances. The kind of changes that would turn a beloved family home into a profit center. More disturbing was the signature on the applications. It looked like mine, but I'd never signed anything. The handwriting was close, but the way the C and Cora curved was just slightly off. And I always dotted my I's with tiny circles, a habit from childhood that Derek had always found endearing. Someone had forged my signature. I sat in my office chair, staring at the screen, feeling like the ground had shifted beneath me. Derek, my husband of 3 years, the man who brought me coffee in bed every Sunday morning, who listened to my stories about obscure marine species with apparent fascination, who had proposed to me on the beach at Cape May itself. Derek was planning to turn my inheritance into a business venture without my knowledge or consent. My phone buzzed with a text from him. "Working late tomorrow. Don't wait up. Love you." I stared at the message, remembering how he'd suggested renting the cottage that very morning, how he'd used the phrase maximizing our assets, how he'd been so casual about the permit applications, so ready with explanations. "Love you too," I texted back. But as I sat there in the darkness, I realized that the man I'd married might be someone I didn't know at all. And if Derek thought he could manipulate me into giving up the one thing that connected me to my family, to my past, to the woman who'd taught me that the ocean holds all the answers if you're patient enough to listen, he was about to learn exactly who he'd married. Aunt Maisie had always said that the ocean doesn't forgive carelessness. It rewards those who pay attention, who watch for the signs, who understand that the most dangerous currents are often the ones you can't see on the surface. I was about to become very dangerous indeed. The next morning, I called in sick to the lab for the first time in 3 years. Derek was already gone when I woke up, leaving only a note saying he'd grabbed an early breakfast meeting. I dressed carefully in my most professional suit, navy blue with a subtle pinstripe that I usually reserved for grant presentations, and drove to Cape May County. The courthouse was an imposing brick building that had seen better days, its windows clouded with age and salt air. I'd been here before, years ago, when I'd handled the paperwork for Aunt Maisie's estate. The clerk who'd helped me then, Mrs. Rodriguez, was still at the same desk, her gray hair now entirely white but her sharp eyes unchanged. Dr. Linwood, she said, looking up from her computer screen. I remember you. How can I help you today? I need to review the property records for my cottage on Seabrook Lane, I said, sliding my identification across the counter. Specifically, I need to see any recent filings or changes to the deed. Mrs. Rodriguez's fingers clicked across her keyboard. Let me pull that up for you. Property transfers, permit applications, lien filings, anything specific you're looking for? Everything, I said. Anything filed in the last year. She printed out a stack of documents and handed them to me. You can review these at the table in the corner. Let me know if you need copies of anything. I carried the papers to a scratched wooden table by the window and began reading. The original deed was there, clean and clear, showing the transfer from Maisie Catherine Brennan to Cora Elizabeth Linwood upon her death. My signature was notarized, witnessed, and properly recorded, but there was another document, filed just 2 weeks ago. A quitclaim deed transferring the property from Cora Elizabeth Linwood to Derek and Cora Linwood as joint tenants with right of survivorship. My signature was on this document too. I'd never signed it. I stared at the forgery, my heart pounding. The signature was good, very good. Someone had studied my handwriting carefully, practiced the loops and curves. But there were small differences that jumped out at me now that I was looking. The way the A in Cora was closed at the top. The slight slant to the L in Linwood. Someone had been watching me sign things, studying my patterns. The notary signature belonged to someone named Jennifer Walsh, with an address in Philadelphia. The witness was listed as Marcus Torres, with the same address. I photographed every page with my phone, then walked back to Mrs. Rodriguez's desk. I need to report a fraudulent filing, I said, keeping my voice steady. This quitclaim deed contains a forged signature. Mrs. Rodriguez examined the document, her expression growing serious. This is a serious allegation, Dr. Linwood. Are you absolutely certain you didn't sign this? I'm certain. I've never seen this document before today, and I certainly never agreed to add my husband as a joint owner of my inherited property. She made notes on a form and had me sign an affidavit swearing to the facts. This will freeze any further activity on the property while we investigate. You'll need to file a police report as well. Forgery is a felony. I drove back to Philadelphia in a daze, my mind racing. Derek had forged my signature to steal my property. But why? We weren't in financial trouble. His consulting firm was thriving, and my research grants provided a comfortable supplemental income. The cottage was worth maybe $400,000, not insignificant, but not life-changing money for us, unless it wasn't about the money. Unless it was about control. I parked outside my favorite coffee shop near the university and called the one person I trusted completely, Lana Gutierrez, my college roommate and best friend, who'd gone on to become one of the most feared divorce attorneys in Philadelphia. Cora, what's wrong? Lana's voice was immediately alert. We'd been friends for 15 years, and she could read my moods better than anyone. I need to see you, I said. Today, if possible. And Lana, I think I need a lawyer. 2 hours later, I sat in Lana's corner office, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and framed diplomas that proclaimed her expertise in family law. She was exactly as I remembered from our college days, petite, fierce, with dark hair, pulled back in a severe bun and intelligent eyes that missed nothing. Show me everything, she said, pouring coffee from an expensive-looking machine. I spread the photocopied documents across her conference table, along with the permit applications I'd printed that morning. Lana examined each page carefully, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. This is sophisticated, she said finally. The forgery is very good, and the paperwork is filed correctly. Someone who knows what they're doing was involved. Someone like Derek? Derek's an investment banker, not a real estate attorney. He might have the connections to pull this off, but he'd need help. Lana leaned back in her chair. Cora, I have to ask, is your marriage okay? Have you noticed any other unusual behavior? I thought about the morning's conversation, Derek's casual suggestion about renting the cottage, his 2 quick explanations about the permit applications. I thought we were happy, but looking back, there have been small things. He's been pushing me to consolidate our finances, to add him to accounts that are currently in my name only. And he's been asking a lot of questions about my research funding, my inheritance from Aunt Maisie. Has he ever asked you to sign documents without reading them? Powers of attorney, insurance forms, anything like that? I shook my head. I'm too careful for that. I read everything. Which is why he had to forge your signature. Lana's expression was grim. Cora, I've seen this before. Not often, but enough to recognize the pattern. Your husband is systematically trying to gain control of your assets. The words hit me like a physical blow. But why? We're not having money problems. He makes good money. It's not always about money. Sometimes it's about power, control, and sometimes, she hesitated. Sometimes it's about setting up an exit strategy. Exit strategy? If Derek is planning to leave the marriage, he wants to take as much with him as possible. Joint ownership of your cottage means he gets half the value in a divorce. If he can gain access to your other accounts, your research funding, your inheritance, he gets half of everything that's rightfully mine. I finish. Lana nodded. The good news is that you caught this early. The forgery is discoverable, and you've already filed a fraud report. But Cora, you need to be very careful. If Derek realizes you're onto him, he might accelerate his timeline. What do you mean? If he's planning to leave, he might disappear with whatever liquid assets he can access. Or if he's planning to stay, he might try to gaslight you, make you think you're imagining things, convince you that you did sign these documents but forgot. I thought about Derek's concerned smile that morning, his gentle suggestion that we were a team. Had he been manipulating me all along? What do I do? First, you don't confront him yet. We need to understand the full scope of what he's done. I'm going to refer you to someone, Victor Thorne. He's a forensic accountant and private investigator who specializes in hidden assets and financial fraud. He's discreet, thorough, and he's helped me win some very complicated cases. Lana pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts. Victor can dig into Derek's finances, look for other forged documents, trace any suspicious transactions. But Cora, you need to act normal at home. Don't let Derek know you suspect anything. I don't know if I can do that. You can, and you will. Because if Derek is playing games with your assets, your inheritance, your family legacy, then he's about to learn that he picked the wrong woman to mess with. I left Lana's office with Victor Thorne's contact information and a plan. I would hire him to investigate Derek's activities while I maintained the facade of a loving, trusting wife. The thought made me sick, but I understood the necessity. Derek had chosen to play games with my family's legacy, with the cottage that represented everything I'd loved about my childhood, my relationship with Aunt Maisie, my connection to the ocean that had shaped my life. If he thought I would be a passive victim in his scheme, he was about to be very disappointed. I drove home through the late afternoon traffic, already planning my next moves. Derek would be home soon, probably with flowers or takeout from my favorite restaurant, the small gestures he made when he was feeling guilty about something. I would smile and thank him, ask about his day, maybe even bring up the cottage again to see how he reacted. But behind my smile, I would be watching him the way I watch specimens in my lab, carefully, clinically, looking for patterns and behaviors that would reveal his true nature. The game had begun, and Derek didn't even know he was playing. Victor Thorne's office was in a converted warehouse in Northern Liberties, the kind of space that looked unremarkable from the outside but housed some of the most sophisticated investigative technology in the city. The man himself was equally understated, medium height, graying hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and the patient demeanor of someone who spent his days entangling other people's lives. Lana tells me you need a financial background check on your husband, he said, pouring coffee from a machine that looked like it belonged in a chemistry lab. She also mentioned possible forgery and asset manipulation. I handed him copies of the documents I'd found. I need to know what else he's done that I haven't discovered yet. Victor examined the papers while I explained the timeline. Derek's sudden interest in the cottage, the forged quitclaim deed, the permit applications filed without my knowledge. He made notes on a tablet, occasionally asking questions about our joint accounts, Derek's business associates, his travel schedule. I'll need access to your financial records, he said, bank statements, credit reports, investment accounts. I'll also need your husband's full name, social security number, and employment information. How long will this take? Initial findings: within 48 hours. Complete financial profile within a week, assuming I don't find anything too complex. Victor's expression was carefully neutral. Mrs. Linwood, I've been doing this for 20 years. In my experience, when someone goes to the trouble of forging documents, it's rarely a one-time event. People who commit financial fraud tend to be systematic about it. I drove home with Victor's words echoing in my mind. People who commit financial fraud tend to be systematic about it, which meant Derek had likely been planning this for months, maybe longer, which meant everything I thought I knew about my marriage was a lie. Derek was in the kitchen when I arrived, standing at the stove, with his sleeves rolled up, stirring something that smelled like garlic and wine. He looked up when I entered, his face lighting up with the smile that had once made me feel like the most important person in the world. Perfect timing, he said, crossing to kiss my cheek. I'm making your favorite, that seafood risotto from our anniversary dinner. What's the occasion? I asked, setting down my purse and trying to keep my voice light. Do I need an occasion to cook for my beautiful wife? He handed me a glass of wine, the expensive Sancerre we usually save for special occasions. I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday, about the cottage. My pulse quickened. Oh, I think you're right to be cautious. Family property is special, irreplaceable. Maybe instead of renting it out, we should spend more time there. Ourselves? Derek's eyes were warm, concerned. I've been working too much lately, and I can see how stressed you've been. We could take a long weekend, maybe even a week. Reconnect with each other and with the place that means so much to you. I took a sip of wine, studying his face. Yesterday he'd been pushing to rent the cottage. Today he wanted to spend romantic time there. What had changed? That sounds wonderful, I said. But I thought you had the Singapore deal keeping you busy. I do, but nothing's more important than us. He stirred the risotto, adding another ladle of stock. Actually, I was thinking maybe we should make some updates to the cottage. Nothing major, just some modernization. Better Wi-Fi, upgraded kitchen. Maybe expand the deck so we can entertain friends. There it was. The permit applications Mrs. Rodriguez had shown me, reframed as a romantic gesture. Derek was still planning to modify the cottage, but now he was presenting it as something we'd decided together. What kind of updates? I asked carefully. Nothing that would change the character of the place, just practical improvements. I actually looked into it a little, purely preliminary research, and it turns out there are some great contractors in Cape May who specialize in historic properties. You looked into it? Derek's hand stilled on the spoon for just a moment. Just some casual research online. I wanted to understand what we'd be dealing with before we talked about it seriously. More lies. He hadn't done casual research, he'd filed actual permit applications with forged signatures. But I kept my expression interested and supportive. That's very thoughtful of you, I said. I'd love to hear what you found. Over dinner, Derek outlined his preliminary research in detail. He'd identified contractors, researched permit requirements, even looked into the cost of materials. He presented it all as if the ideas had just occurred to him, as if he'd spent an afternoon browsing home improvement websites instead of weeks filing fraudulent paperwork. I played the role of the enthusiastic wife, asking questions about timelines and budgets, suggesting modifications that would honor Aunt Maisie's memory. It was a masterful performance on both sides, Derek pretending to be the considerate husband, me pretending to be the trusting wife. But underneath the pleasant dinner conversation, I was taking notes. Derek had researched this extensively, which meant he'd been planning it for months. He knew the names of specific contractors, the cost of materials, the timeline for permit approval. This wasn't a casual idea, it was a fully developed plan. After dinner, Derek went to his home office to catch up on some work. I cleaned the kitchen and then went to my own office, where I'd hidden a small digital recorder behind my desk lamp. If Derek was going to continue lying to me, I wanted evidence of everything he said. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is Victor. Preliminary findings ready. Can we meet tomorrow morning? Coffee shop on Pine Street at 9 a.m.? I texted back. Yes, thank you. Then I sat in my office chair, staring at the framed photo on my desk, Derek and me on our wedding day, both of us laughing at something my cousin had said. We looked so happy, so genuinely in love. Had Derek been planning this even then? Or had something changed in our marriage that I'd been too blind to see? My laptop chimed with an email notification. It was from my research assistant, Dev Patel, the earnest graduate student who'd been helping me with the jellyfish migration study. Dr. Linwood, his email read. I was reviewing the security footage from the Marine Lab's cameras. We had some equipment go missing last week and I noticed something interesting. There's a backup drive in the system that automatically records to a cloud server. I didn't know we had that capability. Did you set it up? I stared at the email, my mind racing. I hadn't set up any backup drives or cloud servers for the lab. But if Dev had found one, it meant someone else had installed it. Someone with access to our systems. I called Dev immediately. Tell me about this backup drive, I said without preamble. It's sophisticated, Dev said, his voice excited in the way that only came from discovering something unexpected. Whoever set it up knew what they were doing. It's been running for months, automatically backing up all our computer activity to an encrypted server. Have you accessed the files? Not yet. I thought I should ask you first. But Dr. Linwood, the installation date is interesting. It was set up right after the university's ID security upgrade last fall. Remember when they had us all reset our passwords? I remembered. Derek had been very helpful during that process, offering to help me remember my new passwords, even suggesting I write them down somewhere safe in case I forgot them. Dev, I need you to do something for me. Can you trace where this backup drive sends its data? And can you access the files without whoever set it up knowing about it? Probably. It might take me a day or two, but I think I can do it. Should I be worried about what I might find? I thought about Derek's performance at dinner, his careful lies about researching contractors, his sudden interest in my family property. Let's just say I'm concerned about security breaches. And Dev, keep this between us for now. After I hung up, I sat in the darkness of my office, pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. Derek had been monitoring my computer activity, tracking my passwords, studying my digital habits. He'd been planning this for months, maybe since the beginning of our marriage. But he'd made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated me. Derek thought he was married to a trusting, naive scientist who would never suspect her loving husband of fraud. He thought he could manipulate me with romantic dinners and concerned smiles, that he could gaslight me into believing I'd forgotten signing important documents. He was wrong. From my office, I could hear Derek on a phone call, his voice low and urgent. I couldn't make out the words, but his tone was different, sharper, more calculating than the warm, loving voice he used with me. Tomorrow, I would meet with Victor and learn what other secrets Derek had been hiding. I would work with Dev to uncover the extent of his digital surveillance, and I would continue to smile and play the loving wife while I gathered the evidence I needed to destroy him. Aunt Maisie used to say that the ocean teaches patience, that the strongest currents work slowly, invisibly reshaping the shoreline one grain of sand at a time. Derek had been working like a strong current, slowly, invisibly, trying to reshape my life to suit his purposes. But now I was the current, and I was about to reshape his entire world. The game had begun, and I was going to win. The coffee shop on Pine Street was crowded with the morning rush, but Victor had chosen a corner table away from the noise. He looked up from his laptop as I approached, his expression carefully neutral in the way that meant he had bad news. How much do you want to know? He asked without preamble, sliding a manila folder across the table. Everything, I said, settling into my chair and wrapping my hands around my coffee cup for warmth. Victor opened his own copy of the folder. Your husband has been very busy. The cottage forgery was just the beginning. He pulled out a series of financial statements. 3 months ago, Derek opened a business account under the name Linwood Property Management. He used your cottage as collateral for a line of credit worth $200,000. My stomach dropped. That's impossible. The cottage isn't worth that much. It is if you're planning to develop it. I found communications between Derek and a development company called Coastal Luxury Holdings. They're interested in purchasing the cottage for $800,000, nearly double its current market value. Why would they pay so much? Victor pulled out a photograph of a glossy brochure. Because they don't want the cottage. They want the land. Coastal Luxury specializes in tearing down historic properties and building luxury condominiums. Your cottage sits on a prime piece of waterfront real estate. Developed properly, it could accommodate 4 luxury units worth $500,000 each. I stared at the brochure, feeling physically sick. The cover showed a sleek modern building that looked nothing like the Victorian cottages that gave Cape May its charm. Inside were floor plans for units with panoramic ocean views and private beach access, the same views and beach access that had belonged to my family for generations. There's more, Victor continued. Derek has been in contact with a real estate agent named Margot Kane. She's been showing the cottage to potential buyers for the past month. Showing it? But I would have known the security system would have alerted me. He disabled the security system 3 weeks ago. Told the monitoring company you were having problems with false alarms and needed a temporary suspension. Victor. Slid another document across the table. He used your name and account information to authorize it. I felt the walls of the coffee shop closing in around me. Derek hadn't just forged one document, he'd been systematically dismantling my life, piece by piece, using my own information against me. How long has this been going on? Based on the financial records, at least 6 months. But the planning probably started much earlier. Victor's expression was grim. Mrs. Linwood, there's something else. Margot Kane isn't just Derek's real estate agent, she's also his companion. The word hit me like a physical blow. His what? I have photographs of them together at restaurants, hotels, credit card records showing purchases of jewelry, flowers, expensive dinners. He's been conducting a relationship with her for at least 4 months. Victor pulled out a series of photographs, but I held up my hand to stop him. I didn't want to see them. The betrayal was complete enough without visual evidence. So he's selling my family home to fund his affair. It's worse than that. Margot Kane has a history of working with developers to acquire historic properties under questionable circumstances. She's currently under investigation by the State Real Estate Board for previous irregularities. I sat back in my chair, trying to process the enormity of Derek's deception. He'd been planning to steal my cottage, destroy it for profit, and use the money to fund his new life with another woman. Everything about our marriage, our conversations about the future, our plans, all of it had been lies. What do I do now? We need to stop the sale before it goes through. According to my sources, Derek has a showing scheduled for this afternoon with a representative from Coastal Luxury Holdings. If they make an offer and he accepts it using the forged documents, the cottage could be gone before I can stop it legally. Victor nodded. Exactly. Which is why I think you need to be there. 2 hours later, I was driving toward Cape May with a plan that felt both necessary and terrifying. Victor had provided me with a small recording device and instructions on how to use it. Dev had called that morning with news that he'd accessed the backup drive. Derek had been monitoring my computer activity for months, tracking my emails, my research, even my personal browsing history. The cottage looked exactly as it always had from the outside: weathered cedar shingles, white trim that needed touching up, the wraparound porch where Aunt Maisie used to sit with her morning coffee. But knowing that strangers had been walking through it, evaluating it for destruction, made it feel violated. I parked down the street and walked along the beach, approaching the cottage from the waterside. The spare key was still hidden under the loose board on the back porch, exactly where Aunt Maisie had kept it. I let myself in through the kitchen door, my heart breaking at the familiar smell of salt air and old wood. Everything was exactly as I'd left it after my last visit in early spring: the blue and white dishes in the glass-fronted cabinets, the collection of sea glass on the windowsill, the faded photographs of 4 generations of my family enjoying summers by the ocean. Derek had brought strangers here to evaluate my memories, my heritage, for their commercial potential. I heard voices on the front porch and quickly moved to the living room, positioning myself behind the heavy drapes where I could see without being seen. Derek was walking up the front steps with a woman I recognized from Victor's photographs: Margot Kane, tall and blonde with the kind of polished elegance that came from expensive salons and designer clothes. Behind them was a man, in an expensive suit, carrying a briefcase and a tablet. He looked around with the calculating expression of someone measuring square footage and profit margins. Derek opened the front door with his own key. When had he made a copy? And ushered them inside. As you can see, the bones of the house are solid, Derek was saying, his voice carrying the confident tone he used when closing business deals. The foundation is excellent, and the lot size gives you plenty of room for expansion. The Victorian details are charming, Margot added, running her hand along the carved banister, but they'd be easy enough to remove during renovation. Remove? They were talking about removing the hand-carved details that my great-grandfather had installed himself, the intricate woodwork that had taken months to complete. The man with the briefcase, Mr. Chen from Coastal Luxury Holdings, according to Victor's research, walked through the rooms with practiced efficiency, occasionally making notes on his tablet. The kitchen and bathrooms would need complete modernization, he said, standing in the doorway of Aunt Maisie's cheerful yellow kitchen with its vintage appliances and hand-painted tiles. But the footprint works well for our standard for unit configuration. Derek nodded enthusiastically. My wife and I are very motivated sellers. We're relocating for her work, and we need to close quickly. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Your wife isn't here today? Chen asked. She's dealing with the logistics of our move. Derek replied smoothly, but she's fully on board with the sale. This place has too many memories for her. It's hard for her to be objective about its commercial potential. I pressed the record button on Victor's device, my hands shaking with rage. Derek was not only lying about my agreement to sell, he was painting me as an emotional woman too attached to the past to make rational decisions. The zoning permits for demolition shouldn't be a problem, Margot said, consulting her phone. I've already spoken with the Planning Commission about the project. There's strong support for luxury development in this area, Chen nodded. Excellent. Based on what I've seen today, Coastal Luxury is prepared to make an offer of $750,000, with a 30-day close. That works perfectly for our timeline, Derek said. When can we have the paperwork? I'll have the contracts drawn up by tomorrow. We can schedule the signing for Friday if that works for you and your wife. Friday is perfect. They spent another 20 minutes walking through the cottage, discussing renovation plans that made my stomach turn. They talked about removing the built-in bookcases in the library, updating the dated bathroom fixtures, and replacing the original hardwood floors with more practical materials. After they left, I sat alone in Aunt Maisie's living room, surrounded by the memories they wanted to demolish. The afternoon light streamed through the lace curtains, casting familiar patterns on the worn Persian rug. This was where I'd learned to read, curled up in the window seat with Aunt Maisie beside me. This was where she'd taught me to identify different types of shells, where she'd told me stories about our family's history in Cape May. Derek was going to destroy all of it for money. I called Victor from the cottage. I got the recording. They're planning to sign contracts on Friday. Good. That gives us 3 days to file for an injunction and expose the fraud. How are you holding up? I'm angry, I said, and realized it was true. The hurt and betrayal were still there, but underneath them was a cold, clean rage that felt like clarity. Victor, I want to know everything. Every lie, every forged document, every secret account. I want to know about other women, other properties, any other crimes he's committed. That's a dangerous path, Mrs. Linwood. Are you sure you want to go down it? I looked around the cottage, at the photographs of my grandmother as a young woman, at the shell collection Aunt Maisie had started as a child, at the rocking chair where she'd sat every evening watching the sunset. He picked the wrong woman to betray, I said, and he picked the wrong family legacy to destroy. After I hung up, I walked through every room of the cottage, taking photographs and videos with my phone. If Derek thought he could steal my family's history, he was about to learn that I'd fight back with everything I had. The drive back to Philadelphia gave me time to think, to plan, to transform my shock and hurt into something more useful: strategy. Derek was expecting to come home to his trusting wife, to continue his performance of the loving husband while he finalized the destruction of everything I held dear. Instead, he was going to find a very different woman than the one he'd left. That morning, Lana's conference room had been transformed into a command center. Legal documents covered the polished table. Victor's laptop displayed financial spreadsheets, and a whiteboard mapped out the timeline of Derek's deception. It was 8 o'clock in the evening, and we'd been working for 3 hours. The injunction will stop the sale temporarily, Lana said, reviewing the paperwork she'd prepared. But we need more than just the forged signature to make this stick long term. Forgery is a felony, but we need to prove intent to defraud. Victor looked up from his laptop. I can provide that. Derek's been planning this for at least 8 months. I've traced the communication with Margot Kane back to last September, right after Mrs. Linwood mentioned wanting to spend more time at the cottage. He was using my own words against me, I said, remembering a conversation we'd had about maybe taking a sabbatical, spending a summer doing research from Cape May instead of the university lab. There's more, Victor continued. Margot Kane's real estate license was suspended last year for 3 months due to irregularities in another historic property sale. She's been working under a provisional license that requires additional oversight for all transactions. Lana made notes on her legal pad, which means the state real estate board would be very interested in her involvement in a fraudulent sale. What about the other women? I asked. You mentioned Derek had a pattern. Victor's expression grew grim. I've identified 2 other potential victims. Sarah Martinez in Baltimore. Derek dated her for 6 months last year while he was supposedly traveling for business. She owned a townhouse in Federal Hill that she sold suddenly and then moved to Florida. And Jennifer Walsh in D.C. Wait, I interrupted. Jennifer Walsh? That name was on the notarized quitclaim deed. The same Jennifer Walsh. Derek dated her 2 years ago. She owned a condo in Georgetown that she sold after they broke up. She moved to Seattle and works as a freelance notary now. The pieces clicked into place. He's been doing this to other women, using relationships to gain access to their assets. It's a sophisticated pattern, Victor said. Derek targets women with valuable real estate, usually inherited property with emotional significance. He gains their trust, learns about their assets, then manipulates them into signing documents or forges their signatures outright. Lana leaned back in her chair. This is bigger than just your cottage, Cora. If we can prove a pattern of fraud across multiple states, this becomes a federal case. What about the other victims? Can we contact them? I've already reached out through intermediaries, Victor said. Sarah Martinez is willing to talk. She suspected something was wrong but didn't have proof. Jennifer Walsh is more cautious, but she's agreed to review documents if we can guarantee her protection. My phone buzzed with a text from Derek. Working? Late again. Don't wait up. Love you. I showed the message to Lana and Victor. It was nearly identical to the texts he'd been sending for weeks, I realized. Standard phrases that required no thought or genuine emotion. He's probably with Margot, Lana said. Celebrating the deal. They think they're going to close Friday. Good, I said, surprised by the coldness in my own voice. Let them celebrate. It'll make Friday even more devastating. Victor closed his laptop. Mrs. Linwood, before we proceed, I need to ask you something. Are you prepared for this to get ugly? Derek is going to fight back, and he's going to use everything he can against you. He'll try to claim you're mentally unstable, that you forgot signing documents, that you're having a breakdown. Let him try, I said. I have something he doesn't. What's that? The truth and evidence. I pulled out my phone and played the recording from the cottage. Derek's voice filled the conference room, confident and casual as he lied about my agreement to sell, as he painted me as an emotional woman too attached to the past. Lana smiled, the predatory smile I remembered from law school when she'd found a weakness in an opponent's argument. That's fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, and defamation. He just handed us his head on a platter. Dev called while we were packing up the documents. Dr. Linwood, I've been analyzing the backup drive data. You need to see this. Can you bring it to Lana's office? We're here for another hour. On my way. Dev arrived 20 minutes later, carrying his laptop and looking like he hadn't slept. At 24, he had the intense focus of someone who'd discovered that the world was more complicated than he'd previously understood. The surveillance software on your computer is commercial grade, he said, setting up his laptop on Lana's conference table. It's the kind of thing corporations use to monitor employee activity. It tracks every keystroke, every website visit, every email. How long has it been running? Victor asked. 8 months. It was installed the same day as the university's security upgrade. Whoever did it used the confusion of the system changes to hide the installation. Dev pulled up a data visualization showing my computer activity over time. Dr. Linwood, he knows everything. Every email you've sent, every document you've accessed, every Google search you've made. He's been watching your research, your personal correspondence, your financial activity. The violation felt physical, nauseating. Derek had been living inside my digital life for months, watching me work, monitoring my communications with friends and colleagues, tracking my every move online. Can you tell if he accessed specific information? Lana asked. I can give you a complete log of what he viewed and when. Dev's fingers flew across his keyboard. For example, 3 weeks ago he spent 40 minutes reviewing your email correspondence with your cousin about family memories at the cottage. 2 weeks ago, he downloaded copies of your bank statements and investment account information. He was gathering intelligence, Victor said, learning everything he could about your assets, your emotional attachments, your relationships. There's something else, Dev said. The software also has remote access capabilities. He could control your computer from anywhere, send emails, as if they were from you, access your accounts using saved passwords. Lana was taking furious notes. This is cyber stalking, identity theft, and violation of privacy laws. Dev, can you preserve all this evidence in a format that will hold up in court? Already done. I've created encrypted backups with timestamps and digital signatures to prove authenticity. After Dev left, the three of us sat in Lana's conference room, surrounded by evidence of Derek's systematic betrayal. The scope of his deception was staggering, not just the cottage, but months of surveillance, manipulation, and preparation for a theft that would have left me financially and emotionally devastated. What's our timeline? I asked. I'll file the injunction first thing tomorrow morning, Lana said. That will stop the sale and freeze the property while we prepare the criminal charges. Victor will continue gathering evidence on the other victims. And you, I go home and act like nothing has changed. I finished, for now. But Cora, once we file those papers tomorrow, there's no going back. Derek will know you're onto him, and he'll either flee or fight. Are you ready for that? I thought about Derek's performance at the cottage, his casual dismissal of my emotional attachment to my family's history, his willingness to destroy something irreplaceable for money. I thought about him watching my every digital move for months, violating my privacy while he planned to violate my trust. I'm ready, I said. Derek made one crucial mistake. What's that? He underestimated me. He saw a trusting wife and thought I'd be an easy mark. He never considered that I might be smarter than he is. Lana grinned. He's about to get a very unpleasant education. I drove home through the quiet Philadelphia streets, past the restaurants where Derek and I had shared romantic dinners, past the park where we'd walked on Sunday mornings, past all the places that had seemed to represent our happy marriage. But now I understood that while I'd been building a life with someone I loved, Derek had been executing a long-term plan to strip me of everything I valued. The brownstone was dark when I arrived. Derek's car wasn't in the driveway, which meant he was still working late, probably celebrating with Margot Kane, counting the money they expected to make from destroying my family's legacy. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat in the living room, looking around at the furniture we'd chosen together, the art we'd collected, the photographs of what I'd thought was our happy marriage. How much of it had been real? How much had been Derek playing a role, manipulating me into trusting him while he planned to rob me? My phone buzzed with another text. Don't wait up. Big day tomorrow. He was right about that. Tomorrow was going to be a very big day indeed. I finished my wine and went upstairs to bed, setting my alarm for 6 a.m. Tomorrow, Lana would file the paperwork that would stop Derek's theft. Victor would continue building the case that would send Derek to prison, and I would begin the process of reclaiming everything he'd tried to steal. Derek thought he was married to a naive scientist who would never suspect her loving husband of fraud. Tomorrow, he would discover that he'd actually married someone much more dangerous, a woman who understood that the most important battles are won not through emotion, but through careful planning, solid evidence, and the patience to wait for exactly the right moment to strike. The war was about to begin, and I intended to win it. The call came at 7:30 in the morning, 30 minutes after Lana had filed the injunction. I was in my kitchen, making coffee and pretending to read the newspaper while actually rehearsing how I would act, when Derek came downstairs. Cora? The voice was female, nervous, unfamiliar. This is Margot Kane. I think we need to talk. I nearly dropped my coffee cup. I'm sorry, who is this? Please don't hang up. I know who you are, and I know what Derek has been planning. But there are things you don't know, things that are going to happen today that will make everything much worse. My pulse quickened. What kind of things? Not over the phone. Can you meet me? There's a diner on Route 9, just outside Cape May, the Sunrise Cafe. Can you be there in 2 hours? I looked toward the stairs, listening for sounds of Derek waking up. Why should I trust you? Because your injunction just froze the cottage sale, and Derek is about to do something very stupid to get around it. And because I'm the only person who can prove what he's really been planning. 2 hours later, I sat in a booth at the Sunrise Cafe, watching through the window as a black Mercedes pulled into the parking lot. Margot Kane emerged looking nothing like the polished real estate agent I'd seen at my cottage. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. She wore jeans and a sweater instead of designer clothes, and her face was pale with exhaustion. She slid into the booth across from me, clutching a coffee cup with shaking hands. Thank you for coming. Talk, I said simply. Derek is planning to leave the country. Tonight, Margot's voice was barely above a whisper. The cottage was supposed to be his exit money, but your injunction complicated things. He's already transferred $300,000 from a business account to the Cayman Islands. My blood chilled. What business account? Linwood Property Management. The one he opened using your cottage as collateral. Cora, he took out a loan against your property and moved the money offshore. Even if you stopped the sale, you could still lose the cottage to the bank. I felt the ground shifting beneath me again. How do you know this? Margot reached into her purse and pulled out a cell phone. Because he's been using me to set it up. Derek told me you were getting divorced, that you'd agreed to split the assets, that the cottage sale was part of the settlement, and you believed him? I wanted to believe him. Margot's voice cracked slightly. Cora, I thought I was in love with him. He was charming, attentive, everything I thought I wanted in a man. But last night, after he got your injunction notice, I saw who he really is. She unlocked the phone and played a voice recording. Derek's voice filled the space between us, but it was different, cold, calculating, nothing like the warm tone he used with me. The bitch figured it out sooner than I expected, Derek was saying, but it doesn't matter. I've got backup plans. The Cayman account is untouchable, and I can trigger the loan default on the cottage if necessary. Another voice, male, unfamiliar. What about the Kane woman? She knows too much. Margot's useful for now, but she's getting emotional. If she becomes a problem, I'll handle it. Handle it how? Let's just say that real estate agents have been known to disappear when deals go bad, especially agents with questionable licensing histories. The recording ended. Margot was staring at me with tears in her eyes. He was planning to kill me, Cora. After he got what he needed, he was going to make me disappear. I stared at the phone, processing the implications. Derek wasn't just a financial fraudster, he was something much more dangerous. Who is he talking to? I don't know. Someone he calls his banker. Someone who helps him move money and disappear when things go wrong. Margot wiped her eyes with a napkin. Cora, Derek has done this before. Multiple times. There are other women, other properties. I think some of them might be dead. The cafe around us seemed to fade away. What are you saying? 3 months ago, Derek showed me a newspaper clipping about a woman in Baltimore who died in a car accident. Sarah Martinez. He said she was an ex-girlfriend who'd caused him problems. But the way he smiled when he showed me the article, Margot shuddered. I should have known then, but I was in too deep. Sarah Martinez. Victor had mentioned her as one of Derek's previous victims, the woman who'd sold her townhouse and moved to Florida. Except according to Margot, she'd never made it to Florida. I need you to testify, I said. I need you to tell the police everything Derek told you, everything you've seen. I can't. He'll kill me. He's planning to kill you anyway. You just played me the recording. Margot stared into her coffee cup. There's more. Derek has been working with other people, a network of them. They target women with valuable assets, gain their trust, steal their property, and then, she didn't finish the sentence, and then make them disappear. I finished. The cottage was supposed to be Derek's retirement fund. He was planning to take the money and disappear, leaving me to deal with the legal consequences. But when you filed the injunction, he moved up his timeline. I pulled out my phone. I'm calling the police. Wait. Margot grabbed my wrist. There's something else you need to know. Derek isn't working alone in Philadelphia. He has someone at your university, someone who's been helping him monitor your activity. Who? I don't know their name, but Derek mentioned them last night. Someone in the IT department who's been providing him with access to your computer systems. My mind raced. The surveillance software on my computer, the backup drive dev had discovered someone at the university had been helping Derek violate my privacy for months. Margot, I need you to come with me to the police. Right now. He'll know I betrayed him. He already knows. The moment you called me, you became a threat to him. Your only chance is to cooperate with the authorities before he decides to eliminate that threat. Margot stared at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Okay, but Cora, you need to understand Derek isn't just planning to steal your cottage. He's planning to make you disappear too. The recording I played you? That conversation happened after he found out about your injunction. He's already decided you know too much. The words hit me like ice water. Derek wasn't just planning to rob me, he was planning to kill me. How long do we have? His flight leaves tonight at 11. But he's not going to just walk away and leave loose ends. He's going to tie up everything first. I stood up, my legs unsteady. Then we need to move fast. As we walked toward our cars, Margot grabbed my arm one more time. Cora, I'm sorry for all of it. I thought he loved me, but I was just another mark. We were both marks, I said, but we're not victims. Not anymore. The drive back to Philadelphia felt like the longest hour of my life. I called Lana, Victor, and the police detective Lana had recommended, setting up an emergency meeting. Margot followed behind me in her Mercedes, carrying the evidence that would either save both our lives or get us both killed. Derek thought he was dealing with two naive women who'd discovered his scheme too late to stop it. Instead, he was about to face something he hadn't planned for, his victims fighting back with everything they had. The game had changed. This wasn't just about saving my cottage anymore, it was about survival. The Philadelphia Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit occupied a floor of a building that had seen better days, but Detective Maria Santos commanded respect from the moment she walked into the conference room. She was compact, efficient, with sharp eyes that seemed to catalog everything in seconds. Mrs. Linwood, Miss Kane, she said, settling into her chair with a thick file folder. I've reviewed the materials your attorney provided. We're looking at fraud, forgery, identity theft, and potentially much more serious charges. Lana sat beside me, her own folder of documents spread across the table. Victor had positioned his laptop where Detective Santos could see the financial analysis he'd prepared. Margot sat across from us, still clutching the cell phone with Derek's recorded confession. Before we proceed, Detective Santos continued, I need to know if you believe you're in immediate physical danger. Margot and I looked at each other. Yes, I said. Derek's planning to leave the country tonight, but he's not going to leave witnesses behind. Detective Santos made notes on her legal pad. Miss Kane, you mentioned other victims. What can you tell me about Sarah Martinez? Margot's hands trembled as she spoke. Derek showed me a newspaper article about her death. Car accident in Baltimore 3 months ago, but he talked about it like he was proud of it. And Jennifer Walsh? I don't know if she's alive or dead. Derek hasn't mentioned her recently, but he's been very careful about covering his tracks. Victor leaned forward. Detective, I've been in contact with Jennifer Walsh. She's alive, living in Seattle, but she's terrified. She was willing to review documents but only under witness protection. What about the network Margot mentioned? Lana asked. Derek isn't working alone. Detective Santos consulted her notes. We've been tracking a multi-state fraud ring for 2 years. Men who target women with inherited property, usually historic homes or valuable real estate. The pattern matches what you're describing. How many victims? I asked. Confirmed? 8. Suspected? More than 20. Detective Santos's expression was grim. 3 of the confirmed victims are dead, all apparently accidental deaths that occurred shortly after they discovered the fraud. The number hit me like a physical blow. 20 women manipulated and robbed by men they'd trusted. 3 of them murdered to keep them quiet. What do you need from us? Margot asked. Everything. Financial records, communications, recordings, timeline of events. And Miss Kane, we're going to need you to wear a wire. Margot went pale. What? Derek doesn't know you've contacted Mrs. Linwood. As far as he knows, you're still his accomplice. We need you to meet with him one more time. Get him to confess to the murders. He'll kill me if he suspects anything. We'll have surveillance teams in place. You'll never be out of our sight. Detective Santos opened her file folder. Miss Kane, Derek is planning to eliminate you tonight regardless. This is your only chance to survive. I watched Margot struggle with the decision, understanding the terror she was feeling, but I also understood that Derek had already condemned both of us the moment we'd discovered his scheme. I'll do it, Margot said finally. What do you need me to say? For the next 2 hours, we planned the operation. Margot would call Derek, claiming she'd found a way around my injunction, an emergency buyer who could close immediately for cash. She'd suggest they meet at the cottage to finalize the details, giving the police team time to position themselves. Meanwhile, I would go home and act normal, pretending I knew nothing about Derek's plans. But I'd be wearing a wire too, in case Derek decided to confront me directly. Mrs. Linwood, Detective Santos said as we prepared to leave, your husband is extremely dangerous. If anything feels wrong, if you sense any change in his behavior, you call for help immediately. I drove home through the late afternoon traffic, my thoughts racing. In a few hours, Derek would learn that his carefully planned scheme had collapsed, that his victims had fought back, that law enforcement was closing in on his entire network. How would he react? Would he flee immediately? Or would he try to eliminate the threats first? The brownstone looked exactly as I'd left it that morning, quiet, peaceful, the picture of domestic tranquility. Derek's car was in the driveway, which meant he was home earlier than usual. I sat in my car for a moment, checking the wire taped to my ribs, running through the script Detective Santos had given me. Act normal. Pretend nothing has changed. Give him enough rope to hang himself. Derek was in the kitchen when I entered, standing at the stove with his back to me. He didn't turn around when I came in, which was unusual. Derek always greeted me with a kiss and questions about my day. How was work? I asked, setting down my purse and trying to keep my voice light. Busy, he said shortly. Lots of fires to put out. I opened the refrigerator and pulled out a bottle of wine, my hands steady despite the fear coursing through me. Want some wine? We could order takeout, have a quiet evening. Derek finally turned around, and I saw something in his eyes that made my blood chill. The warmth, the practiced charm, the loving expression, all of it was gone. He was looking at me like I was a problem to be solved. Actually, Cora, I think we need to talk. The words hung in the air between us. This was at the moment when Derek's mask finally came off completely. About what? I asked, pouring wine with deliberate casualness. About your little visit to the courthouse yesterday. About the injunction you filed to stop the cottage sale. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I kept my expression neutral. I don't know what you're talking about. Derek smiled, but it was nothing like the warm smile I'd fallen in love with. This smile was cold, predatory. Come on, Cora. We both know that's not true. You've been investigating me for days. The question is, how much do you know? I took a sip of wine, buying time. Derek, I think you're confused. Maybe you should sit down. I'm not confused. I'm disappointed. He moved closer, and I fought the urge to step back. I thought I'd married someone smarter than this. Someone who would understand that fighting me is pointless. Fighting you about what? Derek laughed, a sound devoid of any warmth. About the cottage, about the money, about the future we're not going to have together. He pulled out his phone and showed me the screen. Margot called an hour ago. Seems she's found a cash buyer who can close tonight, injunction or no injunction. Amazing what people will do when they're desperate. I stared at the phone, my mind racing. This was part of the plan. Margot was supposed to lure him to Cape May, but something in Derek's tone made me think he suspected a trap. That's good news, I said carefully. If there's a legitimate buyer, there is no buyer, Cora. Derek's voice was conversational now, almost amused. Margot is trying to set me up. The question is whether she's working with you or with the police. My blood turned to ice. He knew, somehow. Derek had figured out that Margot had flipped. I don't understand what you're talking about, I said, but Derek was already shaking his head. The surveillance software on your computer has been feeding me information for months. Did you really think I wouldn't notice when you started researching forensic accountants? When you began having encrypted conversations with divorce attorneys? Of course. The software dev had discovered Derek had been watching my every move even as I'd thought I was investigating him secretly. Here's what's going to happen, Derek continued, moving between me and the kitchen door. You're going to call your lawyer friend and tell her you've reconsidered. The injunction was filed in error. You forgot that you'd agreed to the sale. You're dropping all legal action immediately. And if I don't, Derek's smile widened, then you're going to have an accident, a tragic fall down the stairs, maybe. Or a car crash on the way to Cape May. Those coastal roads can be so dangerous at night. The wire taped to my ribs suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Derek was confessing to murder, but he was also threatening to kill me before the police could act. You killed Sarah Martinez, I said, no longer pretending ignorance. Sarah got greedy. She wanted to renegotiate our arrangement after she discovered I'd taken more than she'd agreed to, so I renegotiated for her. Derek's voice was matter of fact, like he was discussing the weather. Car accidents are remarkably easy to arrange when you know the right people. The right people? My associates. The ones who've been helping me acquire and liquidate assets for the past 5 years. We're very good at what we do, Cora. Very efficient. I thought about Detective Santos's words: more than 20 suspected victims, 3 confirmed murders. Derek wasn't just a con artist. He was part of an organized crime network that specialized in killing women who threatened their operations. What about Jennifer Walsh? Jennifer is still useful. She provides notary services for our West Coast operations. Amazing how compliant people become when you explain the consequences of non-cooperation. So Jennifer Walsh was alive but working for them under duress. How? Many other victims had been forced to become accomplices rather than killed outright. My phone buzzed with a text message. Derek glanced at it, then back at me. That'll be Margot, trying to confirm our meeting time. She's so predictable. You're not going to meet her? Oh, I'm definitely going to meet her, but not where she expects. Derek pulled a gun from his jacket pocket, a small, efficient-looking pistol that he handled with obvious familiarity. Margot is going to have an accident tonight too. A tragic suicide, probably. The guilt of participating in fraud finally caught up with her. The gun changed everything. Even with police surveillance, even with the wire I was wearing, Derek could kill me before help arrived. I needed to keep him talking, needed to get him away from the house where he had control. Why the cottage? I asked. Why my family's property? Because it was perfect, valuable, isolated, emotionally significant to you. And because you were perfect, intelligent enough to be interesting, naive enough to be manipulated, wealthy enough to be worth the effort, you never loved me. Derek's expression showed something that might have been genuine emotion: contempt. Love is for people who can afford it. I needed security, assets, a long-term strategy for building wealth. You provided all of that, until I found out. Until you found out, he agreed. Which is unfortunate, because I'd grown rather fond of our arrangement. But business is business, Cora, and you've become bad for business. My phone buzzed again. This time Derek picked it up and read the message. His expression darkened. Interesting. Margot is asking about my arrival time, but she's texting from a different number than usual. He looked at me with cold calculation. I think our Margot has been having conversations with law enforcement. This was it. Derek knew the police were involved, which meant he was going to abandon his original plan. No meeting with Margot, no chance for the surveillance team to arrest him. Just 2 murders in my kitchen and a flight to the Cayman Islands. Derek, I said, trying to keep desperation out of my voice, we can work this out. I don't care about the cottage. Take it. Take everything. I just want to walk away. I'm afraid that's not possible. You know too much about my associates, my methods. You've already contacted law enforcement. Derek checked his watch. But don't worry, it'll be quick, professional, much more humane than what happened to Sarah. He raised the gun, and I saw my death in his eyes. But before he could pull the trigger, every light in the house went out. Emergency power, I realized. The police had cut the electricity to create confusion, to give their entry team an advantage. In the darkness, I heard Derek curse and the sound of breaking glass as the tactical team came through the windows. Police, drop your weapon. Gunshots exploded in the darkness, Derek firing blindly, the tactical team returning fire with precision. I threw myself behind the kitchen island, my ears ringing, my heart hammering against the wire still taped to my ribs. When the lights came back on, Derek was on the floor, blood spreading beneath him, his gun several feet away. Detective Santos was kneeling beside him, checking for a pulse while paramedics rushed into the room. Mrs. Linwood? Another officer was beside me, helping me to my feet. Are you injured? I shook my head, unable to speak. Derek's eyes were open, staring at nothing. The man who'd planned to steal my heritage and kill me for discovering it was finally, definitively stopped. Is he dead? I managed to ask. Yes, ma'am, Detective Santos said, standing up. It's over. But even as she said it, I knew it wasn't really over. Derek had been part of a network, part of a larger criminal organization that specialized in targeting women like me. There would be trials, investigations, other victims to identify and protect. Still, as I sat in my kitchen giving my statement to Detective Santos, one thing was absolutely clear. Derek Linwood would never hurt another woman. His exit strategy had become his final exit. The cottage was safe. I was alive. And somewhere in Cape May, Margot Kane was learning that she was going to live to see another sunrise. Derek had made one fatal miscalculation. He'd assumed his victims would remain victims. Instead, we'd become something much more dangerous: survivors who fought back, 6 weeks after Derek's death, I sat in family court Judge Ellis Rose's chambers, watching Lana organize the mountain of evidence that would determine the fate of my marriage's financial wreckage. The morning sun streamed through tall windows, casting everything in sharp relief appropriate, I thought, for a day dedicated to revealing truths that had been hidden for too long. Your Honor, Lana began, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who knew she held the winning hand. What we have before us today is not a typical divorce case. This is a case of systematic fraud, conspiracy, and attempted murder that masqueraded as a marriage. Judge Rowe, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and penetrating blue eyes, examined the documents spread before her. She'd been on the bench for 25 years and had a reputation for cutting through legal nonsense to reach the heart of matters. Mrs. Linwood, Judge Rowe said, looking directly at me, I've reviewed the police reports, the financial forensics, and the evidence compiled by your legal team. This court extends its condolences for what you've endured, but today we're here to resolve the financial and legal aftermath. Are you prepared to proceed? Yes, Your Honor, I replied, my voice steadier than I'd expected. Derek's estate was represented by Marcus Webb, a thin man with nervous energy who'd drawn the unenviable task of defending a dead criminal's assets. Across the courtroom sat 2 federal agents. The investigation into Derek's fraud network was ongoing, and they had their own interest in recovering assets for other victims. Let's begin with the property in question, Judge Rowe said. The Cape May cottage that sparked this investigation. Lana stood and activated the courtroom's presentation system. A photograph of Aunt Maisie's cottage appeared on the screen. The wraparound porch, the weathered shingles, the garden where 4 generations of my family had grown summer vegetables. The defendant, Derek Linwood, used forged documents to illegally encumber this inherited property, Lana said. He obtained a $200,000 line of credit using Mrs. Linwood's cottage as collateral without her knowledge or consent. He then attempted to sell the property to developers for $750,000, planning to keep the proceeds and flee the country. Marcus Webb stood. Your Honor, while we don't dispute the criminal nature of Mr. Linwood's actions, the estate must consider the claims of legitimate creditors. Mr. Webb, Judge Rowe interrupted. Are you seriously arguing that debts incurred through felony fraud should be honored by this court? I'm arguing that the estate has obligations. The estate's primary obligation is to its victims, Judge Rowe said sharply. Continue, Ms. Gutierrez. Lana clicked to the next slide. Financial records showing Derek's offshore accounts. Your Honor, the forensic accounting reveals that Derek Linwood systematically looted assets from multiple victims over a 5-year period. The Cayman Islands account contains $1.2 million in stolen funds. Judge Rowe made notes on her legal pad. And Mrs. Linwood's financial losses? Beyond the attempted theft of the cottage, Derek used Mrs. Linwood's personal information to open fraudulent accounts, damaged her credit rating, and violated her privacy through illegal surveillance. The financial damages exceed $400,000, but the emotional and psychological damages are incalculable. Victor Thorne had spent weeks tracing every transaction, every forged document, every lie that Derek had built our marriage on. The evidence painted a picture of a man who'd never been my husband in any meaningful sense, just a sophisticated criminal who'd seen me as a long-term mark. What about the other victims? Judge Rowe asked. One of the federal agents stood. Your Honor, Agent Martinez, FBI Financial Crimes Division. Our investigation has identified 14 confirmed victims of Derek Linwood's network. 3 are deceased, 2 are missing, and 9 are cooperating with our prosecution of his associates. The numbers still shocked me. 14 women who'd trusted men they'd believed loved them, only to discover they'd been targeted for their assets. 3 dead, 2 missing women who'd made the mistake of falling in love with predators. The federal government is seeking restitution for all victims. Agent Martinez continued. Derek Linwood's domestic assets, including any claims to Mrs. Linwood's property, will be liquidated to compensate the victims' families. Marcus Webb tried one more time. Your Honor, the cottage has legitimate liens based on forged documents, Judge Rowe said. Mr. Webb, I'm going to make this very simple. Derek Linwood was a criminal who used fraud to steal from multiple victims. This court will not legitimize his crimes by honoring debts incurred through felony fraud. She turned to me. Mrs. Linwood, the cottage is yours, free and clear of any encumbrances created by your deceased husband. The fraudulent liens are hereby voided. Relief flooded through me so powerfully that I had to grip the edge of my chair. Aunt Maisie's cottage was safe. The developers who'd planned to tear it down and build condominiums would have to find another victim. But Judge Rowe wasn't finished. Now, regarding the marital assets and Derek Linwood's estate, Lana presented the financial analysis Victor had prepared. Your Honor, Derek Linwood concealed substantial assets during the marriage. Shell companies, offshore accounts, real estate investments, none of which were disclosed to Mrs. Linwood. The total value of hidden assets exceeds $2.3 million, and Mrs. Linwood's claim to these assets? Under Pennsylvania law, assets acquired during marriage are presumed to be marital property. Since Derek used Mrs. Linwood's cottage as collateral for his criminal enterprise, and since he was planning to murder her to prevent her from claiming her rightful share, we're seeking full ownership of all marital assets. Marcus Webb stood. Again, Your Honor, that's an unprecedented, Mr. Webb, Judge Rowe said, her voice carrying a warning. Your client forged documents, committed identity theft, conspired to commit murder, and was planning to flee the country with stolen assets. The only thing unprecedented here is the scope of his criminal behavior. She consulted her notes, then looked up at the courtroom. This court finds that Derek Linwood's criminal actions constitute a complete breach of his marital obligations. Mrs. Linwood is awarded full ownership of the Cape May cottage, free of all encumbrances. She is also awarded Derek Linwood's entire estate, including all discovered assets, offshore accounts, and real property. The words echoed in the quiet courtroom. I'd come here hoping to save my cottage. Instead, I was walking away with everything. Derek had stolen, not just from me, but from his other victims. Furthermore, Judge Rowe continued, Derek Linwood's estate will establish a victim compensation fund. Mrs. Linwood, as the administrator of this fund, will work with federal authorities to ensure that other victims receive appropriate restitution. After the hearing, I stood on the courthouse steps with Lana, Victor, and Agent Martinez, trying to process what had just happened. 6 weeks ago, I'd been a naive wife who'd trusted her husband completely. Now I was the administrator of a multi-million-dollar victim compensation fund, responsible for helping other women recover from betrayals similar to my own. How do you feel? Lana asked. Like I can breathe again, I said. For the first time in months. Agent Martinez handed me her card. Mrs. Linwood, the FBI would like to work with you on victim outreach. Your story, your survival, could help other women recognize the warning signs before it's too late. I thought about Sarah Martinez, the woman Derek had murdered for threatening his operation. I thought about Jennifer Walsh, forced to work for criminals under threat of death. I thought about the 2 missing women whose families still didn't know what had happened to them. I'll do whatever I can to help, I said. Victor packed up his laptop, his work finally complete. Mrs. Linwood, I've traced all of Derek's assets. The cottage is secure, the fraudulent debts are voided, and you have the resources to rebuild whatever he damaged. What about Margot Kane? She's in witness protection until the trials are complete, but she wanted me to give you this. Victor handed me an envelope with my name written in Margot's careful handwriting. I opened it and read, Cora, I'm sorry for my part in this nightmare. Derek fooled both of us, but you were strong enough to fight back. Thank you for saving my life. I hope someday I can repay the debt. As we walked toward our cars, Lana fell into step beside me. So what's next? You're independently wealthy now. You could retire, travel, do whatever you want. I looked back at the courthouse, thinking about the judge who'd refused to legitimize Derek's crimes, the federal agents working to capture his associates, the other victims who were still fighting to recover from their ordeals. I want to go back to Cape May, I said. I want to see the cottage, make sure it's really safe, and after that, I think I have work to do. The drive to Cape May felt different this time. Instead of the dread that had consumed me during my covert investigation, or the terror of discovering Derek's plans, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: peace. The cottage was mine again, truly and legally mine, protected by court orders that no amount of forged paperwork could overturn. I parked in the familiar gravel driveway and sat for a moment, looking at Aunt Maisie's cottage with new eyes. The wraparound porch needed fresh paint. The garden was overgrown with late summer weeds, and some of the shutters hung slightly askew. But it was whole, undamaged, still the Victorian gem that had sheltered 4 generations of my family. The key was still hidden under the loose board, exactly where Aunt Maisie had kept it. I let myself in through the kitchen door, breathing in the familiar smell of salt air and old wood. Everything was exactly as I'd left it, the blue and white dishes in the cabinets, the collection of sea glass on the windowsill, the faded photographs of family summers by the ocean. But now, instead of feeling violated by Derek's presence, the cottage felt reclaimed. His lies had no power here anymore. His plans to destroy this place for profit had been exposed and defeated. The cottage belonged to my family again, protected not just by law but by justice. I walked through each room slowly, remembering the living room where Aunt Maisie had taught me to identify different types of shells, the library with its built-in bookcases that Derek had planned to tear out, the sun porch where I'd spent countless hours reading while rain drummed on the roof. Every space held memories that Derek's greed couldn't touch. My phone rang as I stood in the master bedroom, looking out at the ocean. It was Dev, calling from the university lab. Dr. Linwood, I heard about the court decision. That's incredible news about the cottage. Thank you, Dev. How are things at the lab? Actually, that's why I'm calling. Remember the backup drive we discovered? The one Derek used to spy on your computer? Of course. Well, I've been analyzing the data, and I found something interesting. Derek wasn't just monitoring your work, he was also tracking your research into coastal preservation and historic property protection. I sat down on the edge of the bed, intrigued. What kind of tracking? He was documenting your expertise, your publications, your connections in the preservation community. It's like he was building a profile of your professional qualifications. For what purpose? That's the weird part. Based on the files I found, I think Derek was planning to use your credentials to legitimize fraudulent conservation projects. He had shell companies set up to bid on historic preservation contracts, using your reputation as the scientific advisor. The scope of Derek's criminal ambition continued to astound me. He hadn't just been planning to steal my cottage, he'd been planning to exploit my professional reputation to defraud conservation organizations and government agencies. Dev, can you send me everything you found? I think the FBI needs to see this. Already done. Agent Martinez asked me to compile a full report. But Dr. Linwood, there's something else. The university wants to offer you a promotion. A promotion? Department head for the new Marine Conservation Institute. Full funding, your own research staff, and a mandate to work on coastal preservation projects. They're really impressed with how you handled the whole Derek situation. I looked out at the ocean, watching the waves that had been constant companions throughout my childhood, my college years, my career. The water that had inspired my love of marine biology, that had brought me peace during the darkest moments of discovering Derek's betrayal. That sounds wonderful, Dev. When do they need an answer? No rush. Take your time. You've earned it. After I hung up, I walked down to the beach behind the cottage. The late afternoon sun painted the sky in shades of gold and pink that reminded me why Aunt Maisie had never wanted to live anywhere else. The waves rolled steadily onto the sand, carrying shells and sea glass to be discovered by the next generation of beachcombers. I found a piece of beach glass smooth green, probably from an old bottle that had tumbled in the surf for decades before washing ashore. Aunt Maisie had taught me that sea glass was just broken pieces made beautiful by time and patience. The ocean doesn't hurry, she used to say. It just keeps working, day after day, until something damaged becomes something precious. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is Jennifer Walsh. Agent Martinez gave me your contact. I wanted to thank you for what you did. Derek's associates can't hurt me anymore because of your courage. I'm free for the first time in 2 years. I texted back. I'm glad you're safe. If you ever want to talk, I'm here. Her response came quickly. I'd like that. I'm thinking of writing a book about what happened to us, to help other women recognize the signs. Would you consider co-authoring it? I looked up from my phone, watching a pelican dive for fish in the surf. A book about financial predators who targeted women with inherited property. A warning for other potential victims. A guide for recognizing and fighting back against sophisticated fraud. Yes, I texted back. I think that's exactly what we should do. As the sun began to set, I walked back to the cottage and called Lana. How does it feel to be back? She asked. Like coming home after a long, terrible trip, I said. Lana, I've been thinking about the Victim Compensation Fund. I want to do more than just distribute money. What do you have in mind? A foundation. Something that not only helps victims recover financially, but also provides them with legal support. emotional counseling, and practical resources for rebuilding their lives. That's a significant undertaking, Cora. Are you sure you're ready for something that comprehensive? I looked around the cottage kitchen, at the hand-painted tiles Aunt Maisie had installed herself, at the vintage appliances she'd maintained with loving care, at the family photographs that told the story of generations who'd found strength in this place. Derek thought he could steal my family's legacy and use it to fund his crimes, I said. Instead, his crimes are going to fund something that helps other families protect their legacies. It feels like the right kind of justice. Then, let's do it. What do you want to call it? I walked to the window and looked out at the ocean, thinking about Aunt Maisie's lessons about patience and transformation, about how the most damaged things could become the most beautiful with enough time and care. The Maisie Foundation, I said, for women defending property rights and family legacies. I love it. When do we start? Tomorrow? But tonight, I'm going to sit on my porch, watch the sunset, and remember what it feels like to be safe in my own home. After I hung up, I poured myself a glass of wine and settled into the rocking chair on the front porch, the same chair where Aunt Maisie had spent her evenings, watching the sky change colors over the Atlantic. The cottage felt peaceful in a way it hadn't since Derek had first suggested renting it out, back when I'd still believed he was the loving husband he'd pretended to be. Now I understood that Derek had never been my husband in any real sense. He'd been a sophisticated criminal who'd seen me as a mark, who'd studied my weaknesses and manipulated my trust for his own gain. But his plan had failed, and in failing, it had revealed who I really was, not a victim to be exploited, but a woman strong enough to fight back, smart enough to gather allies, and determined enough to win. The cottage was safe. The other victims would receive justice. And I had the resources and motivation to ensure that Derek's crimes would ultimately fund something positive, something that would help other women protect themselves from predators. Like him. As the sun disappeared below the horizon, painting the sky in deep purples and golds, I raised my wine glass in a silent toast to Aunt Maisie, who'd taught me that broken things could be made beautiful again. Given enough patience and care, Derek had tried to break me, but instead, he'd made me stronger. 1 year later, I stood in the same cottage that Derek had planned to destroy, but now it looked like something from a home and garden magazine. The wraparound porch gleamed with fresh white paint, the garden bloomed with late summer flowers, and the interior had been lovingly restored to showcase its Victorian charm while incorporating modern necessities. More importantly, the cottage was full of people: Judge Alice Rowe, Lana, Victor, Dev, Agent Martinez, and a dozen other women whose lives had been touched by Derek's crimes. We were gathered for the first annual fundraiser for the Maisie Foundation, an event that had grown far beyond what I'd originally envisioned. Ladies and gentlemen, I said, standing on the front porch with a microphone, looking out at the crowd gathered on the lawn, welcome to the Maisie Foundation's inaugural Strength and Storms evening. The applause was warm, genuine. I'd been nervous about public speaking, but standing here in Aunt Maisie's cottage, surrounded by people who understood the importance of what we were building, I felt confident in a way I'd never experienced before. A year ago, I thought I was a happily married woman with a secure future, I continued. I had no idea that my husband was planning to steal my family's heritage and use it to fund his criminal activities. I had no idea that I was part of a pattern, that there were other women across the country being targeted by the same network of financial predators. I paused, looking out at the faces in the crowd. Some of them belonged to other victims, women who'd lost property, money, and trust to sophisticated con artists. Others belonged to the legal professionals, law enforcement officers, and advocates who'd helped build the foundation into something powerful. But what I've learned this year is that knowledge is power, preparation is protection, and sometimes the best way to heal from being victimized is to help others avoid the same fate. Jennifer Walsh stepped up beside me, no longer the terrified woman I'd first met through Agent Martinez's phone calls. She'd written her book Red Flags: How to Recognize and Escape Financial Predators, which had become a bestseller and a resource used by law enforcement agencies across the country. The Maisie Foundation has helped 43 women in its first year, Jennifer said into the microphone. We've provided legal support, financial counseling, and emotional resources to help victims rebuild their lives. But more importantly, we've educated thousands of women about the warning signs of financial predation. She gestured to a display table near the cottage entrance, where copies of her book sat alongside information packets about recognizing fraud, protecting assets, and building support networks. Education is prevention, Jennifer continued. Every woman who learns to recognize these tactics is potentially saving herself and others from experiencing what we experienced. Judge Ellis Rowe stepped forward to address the crowd. In my 25 years on the bench, I've seen too many cases where intelligent, successful women have been manipulated by sophisticated criminals. What makes the Mazie Foundation special is that it doesn't just treat victims, it creates survivors who become protectors. She turned to look at me. Cora Linwood could have taken her settlement and disappeared into a quiet life. Instead, she chose to transform her tragedy into a tool for helping others. That takes a special kind of courage. The applause was longer this time, and I felt the weight of what we'd accomplished settling around me like a comfortable shawl. The foundation had grown beyond my wildest expectations, funded not just by Derek's seized assets but by donations from grateful families, grants from government agencies, and proceeds from Jennifer's book. Dev, now finishing his doctorate with funding from the Foundation's educational initiative, had documented our work in a comprehensive study that was being used to train financial crimes investigators. Margot Kane, finally free from witness protection, had started a new career as a victim advocate, using her insider knowledge of real estate fraud to help other women protect their property. Even Victor Thorne had been transformed by the work. He'd expanded his forensic accounting practice to specialize in helping fraud victims, often working pro bono for women referred by the foundation. As the evening progressed, I found myself in conversations with women who'd traveled from across the country to attend the event. Some were recent victims still processing their betrayals. Others were advocates and professionals who wanted to understand our model for victim support. Dr. Linwood said, a woman named Patricia Collins, who'd driven down from Boston. I wanted to thank you personally. My daughter almost married a man who was planning to defraud her of her inheritance. Your foundation's educational materials helped her recognize the warning signs before it was too late. Stories like Patricia's were why we did this work. For every woman like me who'd discovered the truth too late to prevent the initial betrayal, there were others who could be warned, protected, educated before they became victims. As the sun began to set, casting the same golden light that had always marked evening at the cottage, I found myself standing on the beach with Lana, watching the waves roll in. Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't found those permit applications? Lana asked. Every day, I said. Derek would have sold the cottage, disappeared with the money, and probably murdered me to cover his tracks. Another woman would have become a statistic in Agent Martinez's files. But that's not what happened. No. What happened is that I fought back. We fought back. I picked up a piece of sea glass from the sand, clear this time, probably from a mason jar that had spent decades being polished by the ocean. Derek thought he'd found the perfect victim. Instead, he found someone who refused to stay victimized. Lana smiled. He seriously underestimated you. He underestimated all of us. That was his fatal flaw. As the crowd began to disperse, I stood on the cottage porch, saying goodbye to guests and accepting their congratulations on the foundation's success. But the moment that meant the most came when Agent Martinez pulled me aside for a private conversation. Cora, I wanted to update you on the investigation. We've arrested the last members of Derek's network. 14 people in total, operating across 8 states. They won't be targeting any more women. What about the missing women? The 2 who disappeared? Agent Martinez's expression grew somber. We found them, both deceased, but their families finally have answers. The Foundation's victim advocacy program is helping with funeral expenses and supporting their children. I felt the weight of those losses to women who hadn't been as lucky as I'd been, who hadn't discovered the truth in time to save themselves. But their deaths had meaning now, had contributed to stopping a network that would have claimed more victims if we hadn't fought back. There's something else, Agent Martinez continued. The Justice Department wants to use your model, the comprehensive victim support approach, as a template for similar foundations across the country. They're calling it the Mazie Protocol. After the last guest had left, and the cottage was quiet again, I sat in Aunt Mazie's rocking chair, looking out at the ocean. The foundation had grown beyond anything I'd imagined, but it felt right. like something she would have approved of. Aunt Maisie had always believed in protecting what mattered: family, heritage, community. Derek had tried to destroy all of that for money. Instead, his crimes had funded something that protected families, preserved legacies, and built communities of support for women who needed advocates. My phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer. Just heard from Agent Martinez about the arrests. It's over, Cora. We won. We did. I texted back. All of us. As I sat there in the peaceful evening, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. A year ago, I'd been a naive wife who'd trusted completely and been betrayed completely. I'd discovered that my marriage was a fraud, my husband was a criminal, and my family's legacy was under attack. But I'd also discovered that I was stronger than I'd ever known, smarter than I'd given myself credit for, and surrounded by allies I'd never expected to find. I'd learned that victims could become survivors, survivors could become advocates, and advocates could build something powerful enough to protect other women from experiencing the same betrayal. The cottage was safe, restored to its full Victorian glory. The foundation was thriving, helping women across the country protect themselves and their assets. Derek's network had been dismantled, its members facing decades in prison for their crimes. Most importantly, I'd reclaimed not just my property, but my power. Derek had tried to reduce me to a victim, a mark, a woman too emotional and trusting to recognize sophisticated manipulation. Instead, I'd become the woman who'd brought down his entire criminal network. As the stars appeared over the Atlantic, I raised my wine glass in a final toast to Aunt Maisie, who'd taught me that broken things could be made beautiful, to all the women who'd supported me through the darkest months, and to every future woman who would be protected by the work we'd done. Derek Linwood had tried to sell my vacation home and steal my life. Instead, he'd given me a mission, a purpose, and the resources to help other women stay standing. When the storms hit, the woman who'd started this journey as a victim had finished it as something much more powerful: a protector, an advocate, and a force for justice that would outlast any criminal who dared to target the people she'd learned to defend. I was Dr. Cora Linwood, founder of the Maisie Foundation, survivor of financial fraud, and the woman who'd turned her worst betrayal into her greatest victory. And I was just getting started. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.